what I kind of looked at, from all my years as an entrepreneur, first of all, lessons I learned along the way. So just a little about me. I'm an adjunct faculty member at TCU. So I've taught family business for several years, but starting next week, I'm teaching a new class on technology entrepreneurship for undergraduate seniors at TCU. So yes, I've done a whole bunch of things. Mostly what I'm drawing from today is going to be a lot of my time, myself as an entrepreneur, raising money, as well as some of the other times. But yes, I am also a member of the Cowtown Angels now, and that was a large part of what was in the Dallas Innovates piece. But that's relatively new, actually. I mean, I started Cowtown Angels in 2012 while I was part of Tech Fort Worth. And then when I retired, you got to use quotes around that. When I retired a couple of years ago, I became a member. So I am actually investing some on my own now. So where did my experience come from that I'm going to be talking and drawing from today? So first of all, I was a CPA for many years. I left Arthur Andersen and I moved to the Fort Worth area in 1994, and I joined a company that my dad had started a few years earlier. It was called Kenmont, doesn't exist anymore. Well, it exists, but it has a different name now. But anyway, in that company, my dad had set up that company, and his equity partner, the person who had put the money in to match my dad's experience in the industry, owned 2/3 of the company plus one share. My dad was so naive. He had not read any of the details. He had no idea how much that one extra share was going to play into everything that happened to my family for the next 5 years. Very critical to understand the meaning of equity and understand what the laws are in the state where you have that equity. Anyway, I could talk for an hour about that and all the problems that caused. The next one was a company called Pharma Fab that my dad and my brother and I started the following year after Kenmont fell apart because of that one share. So when we started Pharma Fab, we owned it. We had, through the years, we brought in some seed capital to start with. That really came from credit cards, my IRA, friends and family, and ultimately because my dad died a year and a half later from life insurance on my dad's life. That was our seed capital. Through those years, I owned Pharma Fab for 12 years. Again, my dad and my brother with me in the very beginning. Dad died shortly after, and I bought out my brother several years later, only about 3 years later. And then I grew the company, and I had by the time I sold the company in 2006, I had about 300 employees and about $30 million a year in sales. But during that time, there was lots of equity transactions with employees. We had an employee stock ownership program for a while. I used restricted stock. I used phantom stock. So tried all different kinds of things. Ultimately, 10 years after we started the company, I brought in an equity firm that bought 28% of the company. That was about the time we were probably 10 million or so in sales by then, and profitable already. So it's a different thing we were no longer a startup. That was not our startup capital. And then I was with Tech Fort Worth, the executive director from 2006 through 2018. And I have worked with clients through all kinds of equity transactions. So I've done all of those. Now with Cowtown Angels, setting up the group, learning about equity, and now a member myself and investing my own money. I'm learning things that's sort of on the other side of the table sometimes. So that's sort of my background and where I come from. So the thing about equity, and you have a lot of people present to you and talk about how do you go get that equity? How do you talk to angel investors? How do you do your pitch? How do you do that? But I'm here today to tell you the other side of the story. What could go wrong? What could possibly go wrong when you bring that equity in? And so these are some of the themes of what I'm going to talk about today. My talk today might be a little bit more of a downer, but what I'm going to be doing is telling you more about the lessons I learned and hopefully how you can sort of prepare for some of these things and use caution with regard to equity. So, yeah, as I say, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Somebody sends you an email and says, you know, we've heard about you. They're very complimentary. They may have never heard of you, but they are very complimentary and they know you own a business and they want to put this much money in and gosh, millions of dollars they want to give you. And it probably is too good to be true. Or you talk to someone and they want to, they can tell you about all the equity they can bring to your company. And the truth may be that they don't have any money at all. They're a broker of some kind who, once you sign up with them, then they'll go look for money. They don't really have any money. So there's lots of that out there. Lots of people, lots of bad actors out there. That's one of my other points on this page. Lots of bad actors out there. So just be careful. You want to have good advisors around you. If you're with Tech Fort Worth, you can come ask me. I'll tell you what I think. Or if I haven't heard of them, I'll find somebody who maybe has heard of them. Or somebody else at Tech Fort Worth may know them. But ask your advisors and then listen to your advisors. The other thing, one of the what could go wrong stories is, you know, when you're starting up, your stock isn't really worth much. You know, before you put much in there, your stock isn't worth anything. So give somebody 1% here, 1% there. You know, it's easy to give it away when it's not worth much. But you'll always regret it later. And then the key thing is really finding investors who are aligned with your mission. But sometimes, you know, if you bring in too many investors too early, the problem is that you don't really know where you're going yet. And so at some point you pivot, right? That's the big word in our tech community that we all live in. We pivot. But that's okay as long as, you know, those investors put their money in assuming you were going to go one direction and you suddenly veer off and go a different direction. They may not be happy with you. So it's just these are some of the things that could go wrong. All right, so I've titled these lessons I learned along the way. So one lesson is equity is a means to an end. You know, I hear people say people can be very admiring of an entrepreneur who's raised a lot of money. Raising a lot of money is not success. In my book, that is, you just gave away a lot of your potential success. But the goal of the company isn't to bring in equity money. The goal of the company is to build a company that makes money. Or in the case of some biotechs or, you know, some companies you're going to sell before they have revenues, right? So those you're doing it because the success is when you sell the company for a lot of money. That's when you and the investors make money. You don't make any before that. So anyway, it's important to have a good overall equity strategy where you're really clear about equity is the goal, equity is not the goal. Equity is the means to an end. By the way, I have to apologize. About 5 minutes before this presentation started, I had the most humongous sneezing fit. So I feel like I'm being really nasal. And if I start coughing or sneezing, it's the mountain cedar. There's no COVID going on over here. The mountain cedar's driving me crazy. So just wanted to let you know that. So another lesson is, especially early in the life of a company, is to treat equity like gold. It's, as I said earlier, it's way too easy to give too much away when you're small. And I have never, ever, in all of my own personal experience and all the companies I've helped through the years, I have never seen anybody who was glad later that they gave away that equity early on. You know, often someone will start a company and their best friend wants to be their co-founder. And so they'll have this conversation and they'll just split the company. I don't know, 2/3, 1/3. That's what my dad did. That was a bad idea. That someone who's your best friend today, the chances they're going to be your best friend 3 years from now, especially when you've been working together that long, the chances are not good. And if it's someone you met recently, really, the chances they're going to be your best friend in a few years is not good. And then you will regret having given them too much equity. So I put on here this quote, which I remember very well, which was my lawyer in the early days telling me, every share you give to an employee, a vendor, a consultant has the potential to be 2 lawsuits later, them and their former spouse. And those are their soon to be former spouses. They're happily married now. It's only one potential lawsuit, but later on, their former spouse may be your biggest enemy and your biggest problem in your company. I have seen a lot of my clients, not so much, I guess in my case, it was my dad and his business partner who had been his best friend since before I was born. But that one share that came between he owned 2/3 plus 1 share. My dad owned the 1/3 minus 1 share. That 1/3 that 1 share is pretty important in Texas law, I learned. But you can't assume that relationships stay as they are today. So the other one, just be really careful with equity for services. I know you'll hear this as a theme for me. The clients that I work with, some of the people on this Zoom call will recognize this advice, but I tell them, there are going to be lots of people in the early days. If you look successful or you've got, your name starts to appear in the news, everybody wants part of what you've got. And they will absolutely try to convince you. People who are good salespeople can convince you that you should give them part of your company. They are so wonderful and they are going to do magnificent things for your company, and you should give them 10% of your company because they're so wonderful. All right. So that's why I say they want more than you should give them. So the companies that I work with, I tell them, don't give anybody any equity unless you come and convince me you should do it. And I'm going to be tough. But sometimes you'll convince me. So, sometimes it's the right thing to do. But find somebody. I don't care if it's me. I can't help all of you anyway. So don't find somebody who will stand tough and debate with you where their position is always, no, you shouldn't give them any equity. So that you only give equity when you really, really should. And the other thing, the other point I have on there is that they want it now, but you have to make them earn it over time. All right. So if you do decide that that person is the most perfect COO, whatever that you could ever have, salesperson, and you want to give them equity, you never give people equity today for what you're hoping they will do for you tomorrow. You give them equity tomorrow for what they're going to do tomorrow. So you may, for example, you might give someone a percentage of your company, but they don't get it today. They'll get it, you give it to them in a way that they will not have the right to it for another year after they've proved themselves. It's okay, you're showing you that you have, that they have some potential to earn it, but you don't pay people today for what they might do for you tomorrow, because I'm sorry, but 9 times out of 10, they won't really be as good as they tell you. So make them earn it. The other thing I've learned is that employees or people that you're paying for services with your stock, they will never value it as much as you do. You think you're bringing in someone, oh, this is going to make them my partner. This is going to make them aligned with me going forward. But the truth is that you, as the founders of a company, you know how much that stock is worth to you. It will never be at that as worth as much to them. This I learned the hard way. They didn't put the sweat and tears into creating it and dreaming it. And they value it when you give it to them because they feel flattered that you gave it to them. But they quickly forget and want to know what you did for them yesterday, not 2 years before. So just be careful with your equity. The other thing, the reason that entrepreneurs sometimes fall into this trap is that when you're starting a company, you're just desperate for really good people. And it's hard to attract them. It's hard to get them to want to work for a little company. So you're desperate. And so often, again, you're too generous, but they might not be the right ones for the long term. So find that person like me who's going to stand tough when you want to give someone equity. A big one, of course, is know how much money you really need. I have seen way too many entrepreneurs who get really excited because somebody wants to give them lots and lots of money. If you have a really good idea, of course everybody else wants to share in that. Of course they want to put more money in than you want. You need to figure out, find some good advisors around you again to help you do this, but know how much money you really need. You don't want to cut it too close. You need some cushion, but make sure you're not bringing in way too much. If you really need $1 million to get to where you're going, don't bring in $5 million. Don't even bring in $2 million. Sometimes entrepreneurs will say to me, yeah, but they're willing to give it to me now. Maybe they won't be willing to give it to me tomorrow, or next year. I should take it now while the iron's hot. So I should take it now. No, but the problem is if you bring in too much and you don't need it, you've given up too much of the company. If your company's really going where you believe it's going to go, then no amount of money is worth the amount of equity. So just be careful. On the other hand, it's a guessing game, right? Because the other hand, if you don't bring in enough money, if you run out of cash, you lose the game because then the investor's in charge, not you. So it's a tricky balance to figure that out. And I would recommend talking to a number of people and getting their perspective. Talk to entrepreneurs who've been there about what they did and how they chose how much money that they needed. So the other thing, this first quote, so percentage ownership isn't everything, right? How many times, anybody ever watched Shark Tank? I mean, every time somebody's down, I'm asking for $1 million in exchange for 49% of my company or whatever percent, right? And I thought this in the beginning too. I thought, I got to keep 51% ownership in this company. I got to plan out if I'm going to do multiple raises, I got to plan it out. So I still have 51% later. So I thought ownership meant control. It doesn't. It doesn't. And sometime when we have a lot more time, you can ask me for the horror stories of why I know this for sure personally. So, but 51% ownership isn't control. The control is in the board of directors and how many seats everybody has on the board of directors and what the covenants are such that under what conditions will the investor take more control of the board. The board is more important than the ownership percentage, unless the ownership percentage determines how many people are on the board and how many you control. But even when you do figure out that, I'll tell you, I got to a point with my company at one point, I'm going, control of what? I can't figure out what I'm in control of. I remember that day. I can't figure out what I'm in control of. So just be careful what for one thing, it isn't that you need to be so hung up on I can't go over letting them have 49%. I have to keep the 51%. Pay attention to all the other parts of the contracts more than you're paying attention to the percentage of ownership. Percent ownership just determines who gets how much money in the end. It doesn't determine whether the board is going to fire you as the CEO at some point because they have control of the board. Watch the control of the board and the decision making more than you watch control of the ownership of the company. And find the right kind of partner. So, you got to know how much money you need. We talked about that before. You got to know what you're willing to give up for it. There's all kinds of equity, right? Notes, safe, stock. You got to talk to our attorney friends about equity, or you got to come to enough of these TechNests and hear a lot of different kinds of speakers and learn more about the different kinds of equity. But know what you're willing to give up in exchange for that money, and then know who you should talk to. Because, there are different groups, and I realized afterwards I neglected to put on here, accelerators. There are accelerators out there too, right? Who will come in as a partner of sorts, where they'll put you through a program where you also give up some equity to be in that program. And sometimes they give you a little money at the beginning of that program also. So maybe I'd throw them in here too. But the question, it depends how much money you need, how much you're willing to give. Depends on which of these groups you ought to talk to. If you need $200,000, venture capital groups are not going to talk to you. A lot of angel groups probably won't be as interested. It just depends on what you're looking for. And today isn't my day to give you all that advice, because that's a different TechNest topic. So the other thing, here's my plug for the attorneys. Always have your attorney explain the documents to you. When you get to the point of making a deal with someone where they're going to put equity into your company, always have your attorney explain the documents to you, because your attorney is going to tell you all the things in that document that are going to happen to you, all the bad things that could happen to you. And that's what you want them to tell you, so you can make an informed decision. So it's really important for you to understand what will happen when things do not go as planned, because there will come a point in time when things do not go as planned. I don't care how wonderful the company is. I don't care how sure you are about your success. At some point, things won't go as you planned. Question is, what happens to you under your contract when that happens? And absolutely understand what rights you're giving up in exchange for the money. And again, these are things, have conversations with your attorney. And, equity contracts, purchase contracts, they're really complex. And a lot of people look at them and go, oh, I will just never understand that. That's a lot of, fine print on there. Fine, I'll just sign it because I want that money. And I'm just telling you, you make sure you understand the document. Not that your attorney understands it. Make sure you understand it, and don't sign it until you understand it. Have your attorney explain it to you. So this was a big lesson for me. They're your investors, not your friends. I've always been someone who liked to, when I had my business, I had 300 employees. This was a decent sized company I was running, right? And a lot of vendors, I cared about all these people. They were family, these 300 people and their families. And I kind of thought my investors were too. I liked these people, right? Until I didn't. You know, they're your investors, not your friends. I've had a lot of time to think about what happened with mine. As I say, it's another story. But the thing is, they're not your enemies either. They're just your investors. And it's important to be clear about that because things, I don't care how successful you are, things won't always go as you planned. So you just need to know your investors are in this for the money. That's not a bad thing. You know, you may be in it because of your passion for something. You also want to make money, but you have other things besides just the money. As entrepreneurs and starting things up, we care about our employees. We're personally invested in it as well as money invested in our companies. All right. But your investors are in it for the money. They're not in it for all that other stuff. And you want them to be focused on the money because them being focused on the money is going to help you make money too. So you want them to be that, but just know they're not just like you. And when things don't go perfectly, none of which may be your fault, just, you know, COVID hit, I don't know, stuff happens, right? And when things don't go perfectly, you will be on the other side of the table from them, negotiating with them about it all. And by keeping in mind, they're your investors, they're not your friends or your enemies, just keeping the emotions out of it. It's only business for them. For us, it tends to be, us as entrepreneurs, tends to be more emotional. That's the part you have to keep out of it. And again, I mentioned before, you may pivot, but your investors might not be ready to pivot with you. And that's not a bad thing. Doesn't mean you shouldn't pivot. It just may mean you have some more, you may need to convince them that it's good for them too. But whatever you do, whatever pivot you do, once you have investors, you need to keep them in mind and what their motivations are. And that's all I put on my list for today.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Darlene, thank you so much.